Rainbow Dash returned from the labs and snuck back into her bed, sliding under the covers. She had cleaned off all the blood from her in the labs, and her friends wouldn't suspect a thing. After a night of flying and fighting, Rainbow Dash was beyond exhausted. She needed sleep, or she would surely die. Unconsciousness came the seconds her heavy eyelids had shut, and she slept peacefully. "Rainbow Dash, wake up! Please, wake up!" Twilight's desperate hollering made Rainbow Dash bolt awake, slightly panicked. What is it, Twilight?" Rainbow Dash shook the sleep out of her head and stared at the hyperventilating Twilight. Luna got out. She was infected, and she's destroying the force field." Twilight was now sobbing, with worry and grief. "A horde of infected showed up. They're infected half the town already. There's so many of them out there." "How are the doctors? Is the lab secure?" "I don't know. Dash, we have to help the town. I have no idea where Celestia is." "But the lab may be our last hope for a cure," Dash shouted, outraged, then instantly regretted her negligence for the safety of the ponies inside. "You're right. Come on, let's go," she added, in a melancholy tone. Twilight smiled, tears still forming in her eyes. She hugged Rainbow Dash. "You are one of the best friends any pony could ever wish for." Outside was a scene of such chaos, Discord himself would be impressed. Fires raged in the burnt remains of buildings, and black smoke belched from piles of blazing wood. Infected were springing up everywhere, releasing a frightening howling noise. Dead bodies, too mangled and chewed up to reanimate, littered the streets. It was hard to spot any bit of ground that wasn't covered in blood and a viscous black fluid. The town ponies, who were still alive, galloped behind a line of guards. The guards looked more frightened than the civilians, but they held their ground, pointing spears at the army of approaching undead. "Right! Arm up, gentle colts! Here they come!" shouted a high-ranking guard, the only one there who had no fear in his eyes. When the infected started to get close, he added, "It was an honor to serve with you, fine stallions." Rainbow Dash and Twilight ran to the guards as fast as they could, trying to beat the infected there. On the way, she picked up a spear that was laying in the pile of blood. She didn't know where its former owner had gone, but she did know that he was no longer serving with the soldiers. Twilight's horn lit up as she prepared to do another battle spell, and the two reached the front lines. "We're here to help, Captain," Dash informed the higher-up. And then she recognized him. He was the one who stole all the group's supplies while they were evacuating the quarantine zone. "You bastard!" Rainbow Dash punched him in the face, knocking his helmet off. "Stop acting like an honorable guard! You robbed a bunch of ponies who needed the supplies! You cold, heartless fuck!" "Stop! Not now, Dash. I know what I did. If we both survive this, we can talk it over. Right now, I have to defend this city." He was glaring at Rainbow Dash. Dash grabbed his hoof and pulled him off the ground. Together, they turned to the approaching army of zombies, who would reach them in about 10 seconds. Twilight shut her eyes, her horn beginning to glow even brighter. Dash raised her spear. The first infected went down with a ghastly gurgling noise, as Dash shoved the spear into its throat, severing its brainstem. She barely had enough time to rip out the blade and thrust again as the next infected came sprinting up. The guards fought furiously, spinning their weapons, stabbing, beating the infected down. Rainbow Dash was soaked with vile-smelling blood, but she fought hard. Dash wasn't about to let another town become destroyed at the hooves of the dead. After her 6th kill, the blade of the spear broke off, but she didn't mind. She started using the stick as a bat, cracking zombies over the head, putting them down for good. The hardwood handle lasted quite a while, but eventually, that too broke. Shit! Dash cursed, looking at the two halves of the stick. She looked up to see a zombie leaping at her. Instinctively, she lifted the stick up, and the zombie found itself impaled upon it. Mustering up all her strength she had, Dash started swinging, using the zombie on a stick as a club. After a while, the guards' numbers were cut in half, and Rainbow Dash was exhausted. The once zombie was now just a few strands of wet, red flesh. It had literally been beaten to a pulp, as all of its organs and bones were scattered across the ground, leaving only flesh on the battered stick. Dash dropped it and went for another spear. There were enough dead guards that no pony really cared about taking weapons from the dead. "Retreat!" the captain yelled. He was covered in bites and open wounds and was barely breathing. However, he miraculously stayed standing and even dispatched 2 more infected before stumbling off to the city to die. Rainbow Dash and Twilight stood still, continuing to fight. They were fearless. Rainbow Dash was determined to clear out the city and save as many lives as possible, and Twilight had set up a protective spell over herself. Rainbow Dash's cyan coat had been turned completely red with blood, and little bits of flesh from the infected were stuck in her fur. Finally, after a good while, Twilight's magic started to fail. The protective spell she had been using deactivated, and the battle magic turned into weak and too weak to kill any pony. She was sweating gallons and panting hard, and finally collapsed to the ground. "Twilight!" Rainbow Dash saw her friend go down, but couldn't make a break from fighting to go help her. 3 infected piled up on top of her, ripping out chunks of flesh. Twilight screamed in agony and squeezed her eyes shut, blood running down her coat. Suddenly, her eyes opened, but there were no traces of pain in them, only anger. Her horn lit up once again, and her body started glowing a purplish white. Then, she exploded, killing off several infected. "Twilight!" Rainbow Dash started to cry and fight even harder, adrenaline taking over. The spear was destroyed, but she started using shards of wood to stab the infected, and when that ran out, she resorted to punching. Her hooves were cracked and bleeding, and the infected started to surround her. Rainbow Dash didn't care. She would go down fighting. And then, just when she lost all hope, a familiar voice rang out from behind the crowd of rotting bodies. "Howdy, y'all!" All the infected turned away from Rainbow Dash. Dash stood still, panting heavily, with a scowl on her face. Applejack and Pinky stood there, coated in blood. "Pinky here's inviting you to one of her parties. And there ain't no party like a Pinkie Pie party. Right, Pinky?" "You betcha!" Pinky smiled. The infected all started moving towards the two, forgetting about Rainbow Dash. Dash thought that she saw a little happiness in Applejack's eyes. "This is for the Apple family." Applejack suddenly rushed the crowd, holding 2 large knives. Pinky lifted up a spear, her mane and tail deflating. Her face turned from happy to insanely bloodthirsty. Then, the pink pony rushed in, right behind Applejack. Rainbow Dash couldn't see what was going on, but more dead zombies fell into visibility than she could count. Dash picked up another spear and dashed in, attacking the army of undead from behind. In just 10 minutes, the entire area was clear. Pinky was unscathed, just sitting on the ground, smiling with satisfaction. Applejack, however, had been ripped apart in the battle. She was lying on the ground, ribs exposed, bite marks on her arms and shoulders. She was still breathing, but barely. Dash ran over to her fallen friend. "Hey, Applejack." Her voice choked up, and tears ran freely down her face. "Howdy, partner." Applejack's voice was soft and weak. She coughed, sputtering blood into her ripped-open chest. You're going to be fine," Dash said, running her hoof down Applejack's cheek to comfort her. "Now, don't you worry about me. I'm looking forward to seeing my family again." Applejack let her head fall back, hitting the ground. Her breathing went more and more shallow, and then came to an absolute stop. Rainbow Dash started sobbing uncontrollably. She heard footsteps behind her, as Pinky walked over. "Pinky..." Dash cut off when she saw Pinky stab Applejack in the head. "No!" Rainbow Dash tackled Pinky to the ground, hitting her in the face twice, hard. This wasn't Pinky. Pinky wouldn't do that. Her friend had been replaced by a monster. Rainbow Dash continued beating her until she was dead. Then, standing up, she turned around and set off down the street towards the next guard barricade. "I want to help." "Not here. Get to the castle and secure the princess if you really want to be of assistance," denied the guard that appeared to be in charge. The oncoming group of infected was much, much, much smaller than the one Rainbow Dash was just in. The guards would be able to handle it. Nodding, she started flying towards the castle. The gates were wide open, and inside, guards were battling the infected furiously. Blood and bodies littered the once grand hall, red masking the gold. Dash galloped to the throne room and found Celestia hunched over something, not knowing what it was. Dash got closer, and then she spotted it. Celestia was leaning over her dead sister's body, crying. "Rainbow Dash, you need to evacuate the town. Canterlot has been lost." "No! We need to fight them off. There's still hope," Rainbow Dash protested. "There was never any hope to begin with. The lab has been breached. All the scientists are dead. There's no hope for a cure now. Even Canterlot has been overrun. Please, Rainbow Dash, don't let any more innocent ponies die by the infected. Get them out. The guards will cover you." "What about you? You have to come too." Celestia sighed and lifted her right wing. There, still bleeding, was a large bite. "I tried to save my sister. It didn't work." Maybe you won't turn." Rainbow Dash was shocked. "Come on, Rainbow Dash. Even the divine will succumb to a virus. You saw it happen with Luna. I need to get myself away from the rest of Equestria. I'm going to the moon." Rainbow Dash didn't think her jaw could drop any further, but it did. You're banishing yourself to the moon?" "It's the only way. Luna was more powerful than any other infected. If I stay here, I'll turn, and I'll destroy all of Equestria." Rainbow Dash sat in silence for a minute. Then, with a sigh, she said, "All right. I'll get the rest of the town out of here. Thank you. You've done a great thing." Rainbow Dash hung her head and left the room. The infected were winning the battle in the entrance of the castle, as only 6 guards remained of the 18 Dash saw when she entered. She had to fly out of there, to keep away from all the hungry mouths below her. Once outside again, Rainbow Dash bolted to the guard barricade. They had successfully warded off the attack without losing any of their numbers. She dropped to the ground beside them. "Princess Celestia asked me to get all the townfolk to safety, and ordered me to tell you that you will be our escort," she informed their leader. "Afraid not, ma'am. I'm aware I'm disobeying a direct order from the princess, but it's my job to defend Canterlot, and leaving would be the opposite." "You have to help us. We're getting the citizen to safety." "Look, I understand that discretion is the better part of valor here, but my men are ready to die. We have to keep these damned things from getting out. I know you understand." Rainbow Dash was frustrated, but she just shook her head and went out to find the civilians. After collecting all the survivors she could find, and dispatching quite a few infected, they were ready to go. She had found Soren fighting alongside a line of guards. Finally, the group left. The panicking townsfolk galloped as fast as they could, several of them stumbling and falling, and the group had to leave them behind. A large mob of infected were following close behind, howling in hunger and excitement. Adrenaline kept the group going, but they were forced to stop as they ran into another group of infected, almost a mile away from Canterlot. They were quickly surrounded. There was a small gap in the infected. Rainbow Dash conducted the survivors through it, until it was just her and Soren. "All right, let's go." Soren was cut off by a zombie, lunging at him and grabbing him, trying as hard as it could to rip into his flesh. Rainbow Dash ran in to help. "Catch!" Soren shouted, as he grabbed the infected and threw it at Rainbow Dash, then bolted out of the mob. The zombie spun as it was being projected and slammed into Rainbow Dash, knocking her down. She tried to hold it away, but the infected smiled, and as it had just caught its prey, and the black fluid dripped from its mouth. As Dash opened her mouth to scream for help, she instead caught a mouthful of it. Spitting it out, she desperately threw the zombie into the air and flew out of the group of zombies. Then, as fast as she was able to, caught up to the group. They soon left the zombies far behind and took shelter in a small cave. Dash turned to Soren. "So, what do you have to say for yourself this time?" she asked, gritting her teeth. The taste of black liquid was beyond vile. There was really nothing to compare it to. That taste lingered in her mouth, threatening to make her puke. Well, you see, I thought I was going to die, you know. I panicked and just thought of it blindly. I didn't think you were there, I swear." "Bullshit. I heard you yell catch. I'm not stupid. Now, tell me one reason not to make me kill you right here." "Want a reason? How about this? You won't be able to take me. That fight on the roof? I wasn't prepared. But right now..." Soren drew a large knife. "Right now, I say, come right at me." Rainbow Dash grinned, kicked up a medium-sized rock, and threw it at Soren's head. He tried to dodge, but it still bounced off his forehead, and he was briefly stunned. Rainbow Dash lunged at him, pummeling him with her hooves. He dropped the knife and covered his face, which was a huge mistake. Dash picked up the knife and thrust it into his stomach. He slowly lowered his hooves, an expression of shock and pain on his face, as he slowly looked down at the knife in his stomach. Blood dripped from his mouth as he looked up at Rainbow Dash with pleading eyes. I don't want to die. Don't want to die. I don't want to die." He choked out the words, sobbing. Rainbow Dash had to end this. She ripped the knife out of his stomach, making it spurt red blood all over the cave floor, and put the blade to his throat. Then, applying pressure, she slid the sharp knife across Soren's throat. He gurgled blood, choking, trying to breathe, but to no avail. After almost a minute, Soren lay dead against the rocky wall. Dash had a slight headache, and felt a little sick to her stomach. She asked one of the frightened Canterlot refugees to check for a fever. She nodded her head, eyes wide. "This is it. I'm sick. And after only 20 minutes, I've got a fever. I have to get out of here. I have to let these ponies live." Dash looked up, scanning the dim cave. She picked the biggest, most confident one, and asked him if he would lead the group. He nodded and saluted. Rainbow Dash smiled and flew out of the cave. Then she flew straight up and looked at the world below her. The world she was leaving today. Smiling, she closed her eyes, feeling the wind ruffle her mane. Dash picked one of the storm clouds, allowing a ray of sunshine to come down, and then she dove towards the part of the ground that the light had landed on. She heard a boom, a sonic rain boom. She was nearing the ground now, but instead of lifting up like she used to, she kept plummeting towards the earth. Dash closed her eyes and pictured her and her friends in the big group hug. Smiling at the memory, she accepted her fate, a little tear starting to form in her eyes. And then Rainbow Dash hit the ground and never got back up. 10 years later. Little Sunshine stared out the window of the shelter, staring at the sky, looking at the gray masses of storm clouds. That's all she had ever known in her life. The filly had been born after the plague struck. She had lived with death her whole life, and it didn't bother her at all. She did see it every day, after all. Her father, Rock, had told her stories. Of course, most of them were about the time before all this had happened. But he had told her one in particular, one that she would never forget. It was about a heroic mare named Rainbow Dash, who had made the ultimate sacrifice to make sure her father and the others survived. Rocket told her about them leaving the cave to see a giant rainbow in the sky. He said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Rocket trained Sunshine to scavenge, to hunt, and of course, to kill. It was the normal way of life. Neighbors these days tended to greet each other by pointing guns at each other and walking away slowly and carefully. Sunshine was a dead shot with a rifle, and despite her tender age, killing the infected was her favorite pastime. Food was scarce. All the towns and farms were overrun years ago, and food production was at an all-time low. They hunted in the Everfree for all their meals now. While most of the meals consisted of fried parasprite, occasionally the hunters would bag a manticore. Manticores were delicious once you got out their claws and venom sacs. Rock and his friends were always going on about how the pony race couldn't continue going on, how they would run out of food, or the infected would finally catch them. They've mutated several times in Sunshine's life, being able to gallop with the muscles being in such low condition, growing strange protective tumors on their heads, and even being able to transmit through rodents. That's why the hunters always burn the parasprites they catch in water before cooking them, an extra precaution. It seems to be working. No pony's been infected by that yet. Sunshine lived a good life, considering the circumstances, until one day, her father was bitten. Since the survivors only look out for themselves and their own families, Sunshine was left as an orphan. She left the shelter one day, in her teenage years, to live life for herself. She went around, staying in abandoned towns, villages, and houses, taking food from whomever and whatever she could, and shot anything that dared try to get to her. Every day, Sunshine fought off the depression that was created by her father's death. She vowed that she would eradicate the disease to avenge him. One day, the world would be safe again. One day.